Hey, me from the future, real quick. I gotta pop in the beginning of this video. I need to address some things that I didn't get to in the initial recording. First is I forgot to mention do not harass Dr. Skipper. This is not me. I do not condone harassment of any kind. This video is supposed to be educational and I hope, is more of a learning experience. Second, I've already seen a couple of other YouTubers cover the Dr. Skipper video. And there is going to be some overlap because, Dr. Skipper's video was very misinformed. There's just a lot of misinformation, but I still feel that my video is important because I do cover a lot. I go into more detail about the misinformation because there's still some misinformation that I don't see being covered. And finally, before I recorded yesterday, apparently Dr. Skipper did do a response tweet addressing the Godzilla video, and where he says, I hear the noise and I could have done things better for sure with that video. Made some mistakes and got more glamored with starting my quick bubble thoughts with some editing ideas. I'm not a Godzilla fan, clearly. In the future, I'll dive more into stuff I don't got attachment to. And I think it's good that he's acknowledging it. Um, hopefully, he does better in the meantime. I hope he does more research and really thinks things through before making a video. So, good on him for acknowledging it. I hope that that's what that message means. Because initially I took it as more of he acknowledged it, but now was being, I guess, accountable. But now that rereading it just now, I'm like, yeah, it does seem like he's owning up to it. And I hope that's the case because I we don't want misinformation to be spread out there, but still, in the case, as far as I know, by the time I'm recording this, the Godzilla video is still up. It's still spreading misinformation, and I'm still standing by with calling out a lot of the misinformation. And yeah, I just really wanted to say that real quick. Anyways, on to the actual video. Alright, so you read the title, and yeah, it's a little clickbaity, not gonna lie, but I feel it has some sort of truth to it because, yeah, I don't normally do these type of videos, but I mean, if you're in the Godzilla fandom or are a fan of Dr. Skipper, you've probably seen Dr. Skipper's latest video about Godzilla. And like I said, normally I wouldn't do this. And if this video was just his one bad opinion, one thing, I would not even acknowledge it. I would just move on. But the problem is, the video contains a lot of misinformation. And it ranges from either, at the best case scenario, it's he didn't do his research, or worst case scenario, and there's parts of the video that made me really question this, is that this might be more of purposely misconstruing or misinterpreting or misrepresenting the facts to support his narrative and basically grifting, or, which is implying more malicious intent. But benefit of doubt will just say this video was poorly researched. But again, as I will get into why, as we go through the video, why, I would be led to think that. But yeah, and the thing is, I'm not really focusing on Dr. Skipper's opinion. He has his right to his own opinion about Godzilla or anything else. Whether he's right or wrong, or if the take is good or bad, that's his right. I don't care really about the opinion, and I'm gonna mostly be skipping the parts where it's just his opinion. My main focus for this video is to talk about the blatant misinformation. There's some points of misinformation that have already been widely discussed, But there's other parts where I don't see much discussion about as well that I feel are definitely noteworthy. Now, I should say I'm going to mainly focus on the misinformation when it comes to like Godzilla, King Kong, sort of the filmmaking side, and a bit of the atomic bomb side. Not much when he talks about World War II in general, just because I'm not as well versed or well researched into World War II as a whole as I am to say Godzilla or atomic bombings. Yeah, so like those are more stuff that I have done research before, and I've especially Godzilla and Tokusatsu. I mean, just look at my channel. I'm very I've done my research, and if we're going to scroll through the scene, like if you just look at my browser tab, like I have all these tabs open right now. And yeah, this is how bad we're getting is that I have to open a lot of these tabs. Now, I do want to mention first though that the Godzilla doesn't work in America. That's not exactly a new opinion because if you look at this Den of Geeks article back in well last month, you know, why Americans can never get Godzilla right. This isn't a new opinion and it's been brought up by Godzilla Minus One. And another reason I want to talk about this video and the because again, if this was like, this was just a, smaller creator and whatnot, I would not even really mention it other than maybe a tweet saying like, hey, this video is full of misinformation, or comment on the person's video and say, hey, misinformation. But the fact that, I mean, Dr. Skipper is not a small YouTuber. He's not, well, the massive, but I mean, if you just look at, right here, he has over 238,000 subscribers and over 87,000 views on this video alone. So yeah, there's a good reason why I'm making a video talking about the misinformation. So that said, let's get right into it.
Gojira, also known as Godzilla, is the most popular piece of Japanese media ever created. Let's just pretend anime is not a thing, okay, for like 20 minutes.
I mean, like, he's not wrong about the anime. Like, anime has definitely become popular in modern times, but it is fair to say that Godzilla, for a time, was the most popular Japanese icon, or, Japanese media. Maybe not so much as now, and this is more semantics, and we're not even getting to the big stuff. But I kind of want to stress it's like, I think that was more of a joke, so I'm not going to linger on this, but, Godzilla was, is one of the biggest Japanese icons, as a fair statement to say. But let's continue because there's going to be one more thing I want to talk about before we get to the first real blatant one. And alright, and here we go.
Godzilla is so popular that a lot of people didn't even know that it originated in Japan.
So we're just about to go into the big one, but I really wanted to talk about this one first. People didn't know Godzilla was made in Japan, and it was just like, that's how popular it was. And it's just like, I don't know if this was an assumption that was made back in the 50s or just something that has been brought up with the Monsterverse crowd. I don't know where that assumption comes from. And I think this part is important to talk about because it is sort of the problem with this entire video is that there's a lot of assumptions that are being represented as facts. Like, what he just said was an assumption, but he presented it as a fact. Like, he said that people did not know, Godzilla was from Japan, which is such a weird statement to, for me to make. Like, for anyone to make, I feel like to say that's a concrete fact, it's like, yeah, people didn't know. That's how popular it was. And it's just like, well, one, we have Google. So I think a real quick Google search with Godzilla would say, oh, nope, he's from Japan. Or how we have eyes. We could see that a lot of the movies are just oh hey, he's there's a lot of Japanese people. They're speaking Japanese. I think they're poorly. There's English voices poorly dubbed over the Japanese actors. So I think there's a. I don't know where this. Oh, people that know he was, from Japan comes from. Especially since even like some of the humor, like mocking sort of these films, like the giant monster films, there's always this connotation that giant monsters are a Japanese thing. Like the jokes are usually, Godzilla's always attacking Japan. In fact, the Blue Oyster Cult song says, "Oh no, there goes Tokyo." I okay, that's a weird statement to make, but yeah, this is sort of the antithesis of his entire video. A lot of assumptions, a lot of misinformation being presented confidently as facts. And we're going to get to the first real blame one, and the one that made a lot of people click off immediately, and the one that has me laughing. Alright, and this is the big one that everybody's talking about, so here we go.
That it's in the public domain in the United States, since Toho, the company that created Godzilla, never expected the freak lizard to get marvelized one day. So they didn't renew and manipulate the copyright system like a certain company that does with all their...
Okay, so, Godzilla's not in the public domain. Do not think Godzilla is in the public domain. In fact, if we go to Toho Kingdom forums, we can see right here somebody, the user BK Matrix has broke down the public domain, the copyright expiration for the Godzilla films. And for the original Godzilla, 1954, both filming the base character. In Japan, if it's going based on the director, because of how Japanese film law works, Godzilla wouldn't be in the public domain in Japan until 2032. But if it's going based on directors, screenwriters, and composers, wouldn't be into the public domain until 2045 in Japan. In the US, it's not until 2050. And okay, and it's just a weird statement to make to say that Godzilla's in the public domain in the US. Yeah, it says, it's like and then points out the Mickey Mouse controversy when Godzilla came after Mickey Mouse. So, it's just like that's not that's not how public domain works. Now, I think that, and here's the weird thing though. There has been assumptions in the past that Godzilla was in the public domain. Mainly Warner Brothers shoving Godzilla in a lot of their movies back in the 80s because they thought that Godzilla was in the public domain. When Toho kept come knocking and said, "No, no," you know, and it's just like, what? Like, so that's one assumption. Like, in the past, people thought Godzilla was in public domain, but Godzilla's not in the public domain. In fact, if you've been around the Godzilla fandom or know about Godzilla's, fandom history, you'd be laughing at this too because Toho is one of the strictest companies when it comes to protecting their IPs. Us Godzilla fans know this very well. Like, it's insane how protective Toho can be. Like, and this is like a lot of like Japanese company culture. Like, a lot of Japanese companies are very protective of their IPs. I mean, we joke about the Nintendo ninjas, but Toho can be just as bad as Nintendo. So yeah, don't do it. Just don't think Godzilla's in the public domain because he's not. And if he, if he was, Reptar wouldn't be a thing. All right. So I could go on and on about this one point, but it's very laughable. But I think we got to get going. So, and I'm gonna briefly touch about the Mickey Mouse thing.
Loved IPs.
Walt Disney.
Breaking news, Mickey Mouse is now public domain. Oh wait, never mind, just Steamboat Willie. Not even that. The name is still claimed by Disney, so the only legal way to name it is Boat Rat Drives Boat. But
okay, so what he's referring to is trademark law. So the copyright for Mickey Mouse's name, Mickey Mouse as a character, Steamboat Willie, and a couple of his other Mickey Mouse shorts. I forgot the names, but Steamboat Willie, another, sounded version of Mickey Mouse short, and a silent version of a Mickey Mouse short. Those three shorts are in the public domain. Mickey Mouse as a character, and all the characters in Steamboat Willie, they're public domain. And from my understanding, you can still call Mickey Mouse, but it's a little tricky because of the trademark law, which trademark doesn't expire like copyright. So, don't start calling your projects, like maybe don't call your projects Mickey Mouse, or don't try to make it appear that, confuse it with Disney's stuff. That's one thing. But from my understanding, you can still call the character Mickey Mouse, and you can still use the signs presented in the shorts of like the three shorts that I said, but using the name Mickey Mouse does, and Minnie Mouse can, you got to be careful with it. But with that, but also don't take my word for it. I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Do not sue me. All right, back to the video.
This free copyright for Godzilla is only in America. In Japan, our boy is still in shackles. But even in the United States, with freedom, hot dogs, gunslinging, and
what's up with the
that
Ultraman
one
timer?
place,
Like, did anyone else notice that?
Japan still tried to sue the red, white, and blue because, well, you miss the shots you don't take Luka Doncic. I'm not Japanese.
So, okay, like that's a weird statement. So again, we already debunked that Godzilla's not in the public domain in the U.S. only. And we just showed that Godzilla wouldn't be in the public domain until 2050 in the U.S. And in Japan, Godzilla could be in the public domain a few years earlier. So that's a weird statement to make, because funny enough, Japan somewhat has, a more lenient public domain, laws than, say, U.S. does because of Walt Disney. But I don't know where he was going with Japan tried to sue the U.S. I don't know what that statement was about, what it was referring to. Someone in the comments let me know because I'm very confused about that. Like, what, like, did Japan try to sue U.S. for trying to use Godzilla? You know what? Now I'm thinking about it. Maybe he's thinking about the whole like the reverse situation of where I believe it was RKO or Universal. Don't quote me on this, but the lawsuit where they were going after Nintendo for the Donkey Kong, but then it turns out King Kong was in the public domain. So I don't know if he's confusing Godzilla with King Kong. But hey, I will tell you right now, he does get some stuff wrong about King Kong. So yeah, I don't know what he's referring to the Japan suing the U.S. Let me know in the comments down below. But anyway, we're back to the video. We're not even we're just over a minute in, and I've already been recording for almost like around 15 minutes. So that's a good sign, right?
And I was born in 2002, the same year Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla came out.
Okay, so this is semantics, but let's just go frame by frame. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla 2000. I'm not gonna linger on this. It's more semantics. It's not Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. It's Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. But this is going to be I'm pausing it right here because it's going to be important for when we go into a later part of the video, and which leans into more of questioning whether the facts were being purposely misinterpreted or not. So that's why I have to pause on this one, because it like right here, he is showing acknowledgement for one of the early 2000s Millennium era Godzilla movies. he's showing acknowledgement for that. So that's going to get to as evidence into another point that I'm going to make in the video later on. So anyway.
Alongside, but then in 2014, when I was 12 playing, I don't know, GTA 5, the first Americanized version of Godzilla came out. Yes, the first, because 1998 never happened. Jesus.
Okay, so if we're being so he's making the joke that the 1998 Godzilla is not Godzilla, and I do that joke as well. I call him, the Godzilla in that one Zilla, but he is wrong. Another fact: this is not the first Americanized Godzilla. Now, this is the first American Godzilla movie, 1998, but not the first Americanized Godzilla. We actually go to, you know, from there might be earlier ones that I might be forgetting, but to my knowledge, Godzilla King of the Monsters, Marvel's comic run, was the first Americanized Godzilla. Starting in having a run from 1977 to 1979, and this is Marvel's own take on Godzilla. And if we want to be more specific, we have Godzilla's. Again, you want to be like Godzilla's on screen. Whoop, I don't know what happened there. Okay. Anyway, if we want to be specific and go talk about on-screen appearance of Godzilla, Americanized on-screen appearance, we have the 1978 Hanna-Barbera Godzilla. Now, again, this is getting a bit more semantics, but it's misinformation, and we already established that he was very much wrong with the public domain, so that's just leading more into what else did he get wrong in this video. So anyway, back to the video.
Fast forward to now, 2024. Japan has released a new Godzilla film starring Eminem's hit album Kamikaze.
So, okay, that's 2024. Godzilla released a new film. Well, if we want to be technical, Godzilla Minus One was released last year in 2023, November 3rd in Japan and December 1st in the US.
And in the States, Godzilla is now collaborating with King Kong.
Okay, before we get into this, I was just like, I know I'm being a bit nitpicky, but it's like when you start to get when you get blatant facts wrong, you can't help but nitpick at everything, and just be like, yeah, you're getting a lot of things wrong here, pal. Anyway.
And what looks to be And in the States, Godzilla is now collaborating with King Kong in what looks to be a brand new Fortnite event, which isn't that much of a stretch since they were in Call of Duty, for some reason. I know 2024 just started.
So okay, like, it's weird that, it's just like, oh, Godzilla. I think he was just more making fun of Godzilla X Kong the Empire, the new Empire, and how that looks. But I don't know, it shows that, like, he doesn't really understand, it's like, oh, Godzilla and Kong fought back in the 60s, and that was the biggest Godzilla movie for a very long time. Like, it was, like, I couldn't really find the numbers when I was looking up sources, but, there was a lot of, like, not recommendation that was, like, the best selling Godzilla movie. If I'm mistaken, please let me know in the comments down below. But it was definitely like the best performing Godzilla movie for a long time. I don't know if Godzilla Minus One dethroned King Kong vs. Godzilla or not, but it's not like Godzilla and Kong duking it out didn't come from nowhere. It's been a long thing for quite a while, and like, I mean, it was in Godzilla's third film. So anyway, let's get back to the video.
Eventually, I started learning stuff for myself in film history, okay? I was hitting the books. Books being video essays from other idiot film geeks online. Thus, I went down in a really big Godzilla rabbit hole. And it gave me a big appreciation for the creature, its impact on filmmaking, and made me reevaluate how I look at the Godzilla brand as a whole. Also,
alright, so I think, so we kind of like, he might have just, admitted, to basically saying like he like where a lot of this misinformation might have come from. You know, he was only doing research through other video essayists, which, you know, that's a really slippery slope where it's like, you can't just trust video essayists as we are seeing in this video right now. Like this video essay right now is proof why you shouldn't just like video essays from, you know, random YouTubers online shouldn't be your only source of information, because guess what? We're humans, we get shit wrong all the time. Sorry for swearing. I'll censor it out with a Godzilla roar or something. Or maybe the Ultraman timer that uh, Dr. I'm sorry, it's Dr. Skipper, use. I don't know. But the point stands, you know, it's like, this is where maybe a lot of his misinformation is coming from. Because he only researched through others, you know, essays and analysis on YouTube. And again, it's not to say that, you know, video essays AS are bad. I mean, Big Action Bill, great YouTuber, makes amazing Godzilla videos, breaking everything down. But the thing that Big Action Bill does is that he doesn't just get information from other video essayists. He hits the books. You know, he shows where he's actually done a video, I believe, or mentioned in one of his Godzilla videos where he gets his information. And so he actually puts in the work for a lot of the information. And in my like review series of like the Kamen Rider and Ultraman series reviews, I do my research. Granted I could be doing better when it comes to providing the source for the information. And granted, my information does come from, you know, not the most concrete of sources sometimes, you know, because I have to rely on a lot of wikis and whatnot for especially Kamen Rider, because I don't read or speak Japanese. So my limit, like my information is limited, but the point still stands. I at least don't go do my research based on what other YouTubers and video essays says alone. Like, you know, they're great, you know, quick sources, you know, they can be great sources, but they shouldn't be your only source of information. So this is a tip for if you're ever doing a video essay or whatnot, don't rely on other YouTubers solely. You can still use them, but make sure you research by looking at other articles, books, or whatever. And the reason why I'm doing this video is if I wasn't the big Godzilla and Toku nerd that I am, I wouldn't be doing this video and I might believe some of the crap that he's been saying. But because I've read books like well, I haven't finished it, but I've read enough to to the point of where I can debunk some of the stuff he says about Ishiro Honda later on. I've read some of Ishiro Honda's biography by Steve Rifle. I've read Behind the Kaiju Curtain. I've read the Eiji Tsuburaya Master of Monsters. I've done my research. Just we'll just say that, okay? So yeah, again, don't just use video essayists as your sole source of information. And how far are we into the video? Oh boy, we're only 3 minutes in. Oh boy. Oh, fun. All right.
Feature, its impact on filmmaking, and made me reevaluate how I look at the Godzilla brand as a whole. Also, there's a big thing I need to address in this video. I kinda hate Godzilla, if we're gonna be honest. Get the f out, man! To make this really easy for you to understand, Godzilla has what I like to call the Jurassic Park effect. Jurassic Park is a great movie that has cool dinosaurs and sexy Jeff Goldblum, but the film still has heavy messaging.
Dodson, we've got Dodson here! Nobody cares.
It's a critique on corporations and Walt Disney-like figures that try to play God on the grounds of greed. They also like to suspend my Twitter account for impersonating Harrison Ford, which I didn't do. Totally.
Answer me, you black son of a bitch!
The raptors and T-Rex are awesome, this is very true, but they aren't just there for the sake of existing. The dinosaurs have a bigger purpose to the overall film, thus making Jurassic Park still iconic to this day. It also kind of revolutionized CGI and changed the landscape of film, yada yada, but Jurassic Park, yeah, the IP is now just CGI wars with Chris Pratt. I don't know what the hell a carbine rifle is gonna do to dinosaurs. I mean, Mark Wahlberg used a gun to fight metal aliens. And while still making a lot of money, because they sure as hell did that,
Gotta play through
they
the
have,
entire
like, no
clip before I
cultural
can
impact at all. This
talk
is what
about
happened
it.
with Godzilla. I don't have any nostalgia for the old Godzilla movies. Yeah, I still watched them a bit when I was a kid.
The fuck?
And even rewatched them recently when I got the idea for this video. So no bias. 98% of them suck ass. Godzilla fell into the same trap that all successful franchises eventually fall into. Godzilla's look was more fascinating to shareholders and executives than the original intentions and creativity that made him even exist in the first place. So they spammed out Godzilla films. He's fighting bugs. He's fighting mechanized versions of himself. He's fighting three-headed dragons. He's doing shit like this. Because why the hell not? And some of the films are fun, I'll admit it, but for the most part, a lot of the legacy of Godzilla just reeks of cheaply made cash grabs. So when Godzilla turned into a cartoon for kids, a lot of adults stopped caring.
What is this shit?
Okay, so there's a lot. So okay, there's a lot to break down in this part of the video. Well, one, like, it's fine if he doesn't like Godzilla. You don't have to like Godzilla. Plenty of people don't like Godzilla. I'm not sure if I want to engage with you as a person, but that's a joke. But the point is, you're fine if you don't like Godzilla. That's not my problem is. My problem is, the whole only the 54 one had messaging and whatnot, but ignores that a lot of the other Godzilla movies have that deeper messaging. Like, you show clips of Godzilla vs. Hedorah that had a message of pollution, very environmental message. It made Hedorah very much a symbolic horror like Godzilla was to nuclear weapons and and war. And Mothra being a very anti-capitalist monster, because a lot of her films are deeply rooted in the messaging that capitalism is bad. In fact, in Mothra vs. Godzilla, the 1964 one, a lot of the problems in the film are caused by human capitalism. So, like, there is that strong messaging in other Godzilla movies, and that's just two examples. We're not even getting to Shin Godzilla, which had a lot of critiques on the government. But I will talk about Shin Godzilla later on in the video. But there's also, some of the Heisei movies. While we can argue that their writing, how well their writing is, they still try to have some sort of messaging. Like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 had sort of this, nature, nurture, it's like nature versus machine sort of messaging. Godzilla 1985 was a commentary on the Cold War that was happening in the 80s. So Godzilla has been a messenger of a lot of like themes and whatnot, and throughout the history. But it also questions me which movies Dr. Skipper really paid attention to and watched. He said 98% of them are bad. It's like, I mean, you're fine to think about that, but I question, which movies did you go back and watch? But anyway, I'm going to take a drink of water. That'll be fun to edit. But I guess, I just want to say that Godzilla only had cultural impact with the first movie and not the others is really weird, especially when earlier I talked about how King Kong vs. Godzilla was the most successful Godzilla movie. In fact, I would say that Godzilla is more recognizable as a monster that destroys cities and battles other monsters than being just a nuclear message. Godzilla has has ascended beyond just nuclear messaging. And when he says, it's like, oh, they went against the original creators, wishes, he, he's semi right with that. That's specifically a Honda thing. But Honda did work on other Godzilla movies because he was a company man. But what I'm trying to say, it's like there's a bit of truth into that, but it's not the whole truth. It was mainly, you know, like Honda and I believe maybe screenwriter uh, Takeo Murata. I can't confirm or that, but I do know Takeo Murata stopped working on Godzilla after Godzilla Raids Again. You know, but I guess the point was just that from what his general knowledge is that it was Ishiro Honda who had a problem with how the direction of Godzilla went, but he still worked on Godzilla films, and I believe other people that worked on Godzilla, like the producer Tomoyoshi Tanaka.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
I should probably have the names listed up. So Tomoyuki Tanaka, that was mine. Okay, so yeah. Okay, I gotta get back. Alright, so yeah, Tomoyuki Tanaka, who is credited as being sort of like the father of Godzilla, is the one to keep Godzilla running and was the one to bring back Godzilla in the 80s and 90s. So there's that. Eiji Tsuburaya also, was, who's also credited as being one of the fathers and creators of Godzilla, was responsible for the shift in Godzilla's tone and had some more of the say of like some of the more humorous parts. Like there's the infamous part in Invasion of Astro Monster where Eiji Tsuburaya was the one that got the happy moment from Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. That little dance. But yeah, it's just, what he said there about the, creators, going against the original creators' intentions is sort of a half truth. And the unique thing about Godzilla is like, you can't just credit one person for the creation of Godzilla just because Godzilla was something that was built by a team. Like it was such a collaborative event. Like if you go watch Big Action Bill's history of Godzilla 1954 or just do the research yourself, you would know that the production of Godzilla 54 is such an interesting one. But yeah, let's get back to the video, and we're gonna be stopping it real quick because there's another part where I want to talk about.
So when Godzilla turned into a cartoon for kids, a lot of adults stopped caring.
What is this shit?
So then the cycle reset, and this time
Okay, so we got a couple of problems there. So what he's saying is that Godzilla's, direction, like, because Godzilla went more child friendly in the late 60s and 70s, adults stopped, lost interest, and that's why Godzilla went on hiatus until apparently 2014, until that's when the cycle reset. Apparently, which excludes both, that excludes the Heisei Versus series and the Millennium series, which is really weird. And again, it gets a weird statement to make because, like, we just shown earlier in the video that he acknowledges the Millennium series, but also, no, that's not why Godzilla was starting to fail in the 1970s. Like, it's a bit more complicated. There's and that's the thing. Like, so one, we gotta address why Godzilla went child friendly, and later on he, says that America was the one reason why Godzilla became more heroic. That's later on in the video, which is false, but I'll talk about that when we do. But the reason why Godzilla went child friendly is because in the 60s, when the big kaiju boom was happening, we had likes of Gamera and Ultraman that were appealing towards kids. And like, even though Gamera was supposed to be the cheap Godzilla ripoff, was supposed to be, there was sort of this charm of Gamera being this friend to all children that was captivating, blah, that was I can't speak. So, but basically, there was a sort of charm, sort of, it's like kids really leached on to Gamera for being this friend to all children. And Ultraman, of course, was dominating TV. And I talked about that in my Ultra Reviews series. Go watch my review on Ultraman. But the 1966 series, that kids were latching onto these, other kaiju shows. So they pivot Godzilla to be more heroic, and that's why. And the fact, and when he says, it's like, oh, adults started to lose interest, and that's why they stopped doing it, so like that's the implication that he's trying to make, the assumption that he's making, that he's presenting it as a fact. What we got to talk about though, and this is the big factor of why Godzilla went on hiatus in the 70s, because the thing is, the economy in Japan in the 1970s was not doing great, because in the 60s there was an economic boom, but the bubble burst in the 1970s was especially with the 1973 oil crisis. And if you're a Toku nerd, you would know that Godzilla was not the only tokusatsu series to go on hiatus. If, because Gamera with Dai Productions went bankrupt in the early 70s, Tsuburaya had to actually put Ultraman on hiatus, their big show, and they had to put a pause on a lot of their tokusatsu stuff until, and had to, like, pretty much their shows, tokusatsu shows pretty much went on hiatus, especially Ultraman, with Ultraman Leo ending in 1975. Kamen Rider, ended its run from its first run from 1971 to 1975 with Kamen Rider Stronger. Or I'm sorry, it might be 1976 when Kamen Rider Stronger ended. I gotta do a bit more research on that, so forgive me on that. But the point is, in the mid 1970s, Tokusatsu as a whole was taking a big hit because, we're talking about Gamera, Godzilla, Ultraman, and Kamen Rider. 4 big entries that still have survived the test of time, thankfully, but they all stopped making new shows or entries, movies, entries in the mid 70s. And part of it was, Japan was suffering from economic turmoil. And there was generally a lot less tokusatsu. And that persisted through the 80s, even when Ultraman and Kamen Rider tried to come back in the 1979, 1980, respectively. They had to go back into hiatus because it just wasn't doing it, because we had films like Star Wars and Superman that people were still wowed by the American special effects, that Japanese special effects weren't cutting it for the Japanese public at the time. And of course, economy was still not the best. So, there was just Tokusatsu was having a rough go from the 70s to the 80s. And that's not to say Tokusatsu was completely gone, because we had still Super Sentai, Metal Hero popped up in the 80s. Kamen Rider returned briefly in the mid 80s with Kamen Rider Black and Kamen Rider Black RX. Godzilla returned in the mid 80s before taking a couple year break for Godzilla vs. Biollante. So on, so there was a lot of it was a weird time in the 80s, late 70s, 80s. Weird time for tokusatsu overall in Japan, as, economically speaking. Anyways, back to this video, and how far are we in? Oh, 5 minutes in.
Goji went to America, where the same thing happened again. We got a serious Godzilla, and people complained that it was too serious with not enough Godzilla, so the franchise became Looney Tunes. And the sequel somehow had worse human characters, and then people got annoyed with Millie Bobby Brown, the fat kid from Deadpool, and Alfred from Atlanta spilling water on a computer to fry Mechagodzilla's motherboard to save the day. And this made some people not really like Godzilla that much anymore.
So that's, again, weird assumption he's making. I think he's maybe referencing public discourse about the Monsterverse Godzilla movies. I mean, there was like criticism about how, like, the main criticism for 2014 was that the human characters weren't really engaging except for Bryan Cranston's character. And yeah, so it felt like a lot of the focus was on the MUTOs and not much on Godzilla. I feel like that's enough, but they didn't, I don't remember the criticisms being like, oh, Godzilla's too serious. But the weird thing though is that saying like, oh, Godzilla went Looney Tunes, and people didn't like it, and he's referring to King of the Monsters, which that was a mixed reception, and King of the Monsters had sort of like a really rough time, bad timing because he was still going off of Endgame high, a very crowded box office when it came out in May of 2019. But when he's referencing Godzilla versus Kong and saying like, "Oh, people don't like Godzilla anymore," it's just like, what are you talking about? Godzilla vs. Kong came out in the perfect time, right when theaters were starting to just open back up from the first like big wave of COVID. And, but even though I personally have problems with Godzilla vs. Kong, the general consensus that I've found is that it's a fun movie and general audiences like Godzilla vs. Kong. And if they didn't, they wouldn't be making Godzilla X Kong. Wouldn't be happening. I think people like Godzilla vs. Kong. I don't know where that statement that, oh, people don't like Godzilla anymore. And it's just like, what? What statement is that? I think there's quite a few people that still like Godzilla. If that wasn't the case, a lot of the Japanese Godzilla shows and movies that came out in the recent years wouldn't be a thing. Godzilla minus one wouldn't be a thing. And Godzilla minus one being, being real dominant, like in a sense, like really actually having a big staying power in the U.S. box office and extending its run until today, the day I'm recording, February 1st, is a testament to say that, hey, Godzilla is doing kind of well. But anyway, back to the video.
And now Japan has gone back to reset that cycle. And from ground zero, we got a breath of fresh air again. So yeah, Godzilla is in a constant battle of balance between being really serious and being really stupid. But the good...
Okay, just real quick. When he's saying being really stupid, what movie is he representing? Oh, Return of Godzilla, or also Godzilla 1985 if you want to be going with the American version. But that being listed as one of the stupid, like the silly stupid Godzilla movies is interesting because again that's the one that's commenting on Cold War. It's a very, if you actually watch the movie, you would like, you can find it dull. That's fair. I can see that. But stupid or silly, no, it's a very melancholic and atmospheric Godzilla movie. Like, the music, is very dark, and whatnot. It's just like, this is far from the silly interpretation of Godzilla you can get. Like, this is one of the serious ones. Yeah.
It's 1925. Some dude named Harry Hoyt made a stop-motion dinosaur movie called The Lost World. Not the one with sexy Jeff Goldblum and people getting smoked in tall grass, but rather stop-motion clay. Which leads us to 1933, where Harry inspired a guy named Willis O'Brien to make a stop-motion movie titled King Kong.
So, we got another case of blatant misinformation. Like this one being not even Godzilla related. So Harry Hoyt did direct The Lost World. And yes, I'm referencing Wikipedia, which isn't the most reliable source. But I'm also have, directed Harry Hoyt. That is correct. But what he didn't say was, guess who also worked on The Lost World? And it was, and if we go down to IMDb's page, where is it? My eyes. Special effects by, oh, whoa. Willis O'Brien. Yeah, so who did the stop motion of The Lost World? I think it was see that Willis O'Brien. So, and also again, Willis O'Brien did the stop motion on King Kong, but he wasn't the one to make King Kong, to so to say. It's ignoring director, producer, Marion C. Cooper, you know, and like the idea, like right here on IMDb, from an idea conceived by Marion C. Cooper and Edgar Wallace. That is not to discredit the work that Willis O'Brien did in King Kong, because he did a lot of input and he actually had his own idea. King Kong vs. Prometheus, that's a whole nother video and story on itself that has been covered by other YouTubers, but just as that's not the story that, like, Harry Ahoy worked with Willis O'Brien, and Willis O'Brien worked on both King Kong and the Lost World, but King Kong was not originally, something that Willis O'Brien did. Like, Willis O'Brien pioneered a lot of the special effects and stop motion used for, with King Kong, but, like, Willis O'Brien worked on both movies, so it's like that's a weird misinterpretation of facts. So yeah, we have to. That's another blatant misinformation. But anyway, back to the video. I'm tired. I've been recording for almost an hour.
Had a giant monkey going apeshit. This then inspired a Japanese special effects director named Eiji Tsuburaya, who ended up being the co-creator of Godzilla, which means America was 2000.
Yeah, like one of the creators of Godzilla. Like when you say co-creator, it's like I feel like there's sort of like the hey, one of two people, but it's like, like I mentioned earlier, Godzilla was more of a collaborative event, but
2001's Jay-Z The Blueprint to Japan. Eiji Tsuburaya was making movies until he met this guy named Ishiro Honda, and they both said, yo, what's up? You like movies? I like movies. But then the world started.
Okay, so I'm gonna play this video a bit longer, but there's a lot of weird rearranging effects, but he's presenting this as like Ishiro Honda and Eiji Tsuburaya met before.
Beast mode, and then boom, Imperial Japan started going beast mode, and then ring ring, yeah, Honda, congratulations, you just been drafted to the Imperial Japanese Army. Pack your stuff, we go at midnight. And during this war, a massive toll was taken on young Honda. Then Honda came home, instantly went back to the grind and started making some movies. World War II was still going beast mode, so filmmakers had to stop making movies and instead were cranking out good old-fashioned propaganda. In the States, even Walt and
Okay, so this is something that I've read some of the Ishiro Honda biography, and up to the point, and I'm to the point, like, right before, like, I'm at the book. Sorry, I'm stuttering. I trip over my words all the time. But the book where I'm at in Ishiro Honda's life is in his early works, like The Blue Pearl and whatnot. But the thing about Ishiro Honda's film career is that he did not start directing until 1949. And his first directing work with Ishiro Honda was until 1952. And as we can see here, and it's been a bit since I read the book, so there might have been an instance where Ishiro Honda worked with Eiji Tsuburaya when Ishiro Honda was an assistant director. There's something that has to be noted about Ishiro Honda's filmography and work is that because of him being drafted in the war and whatnot, it actually took and just how the Japanese film industry was around that time and how young it was, Honda actually had a lot, had to struggle to get to his, his first directing gig. He was like in his late 30s when he finally got to be a director. Where, because again, he was drafted in the war or not, but he was stuck being an assistant director. And he implies that, and this is the weird thing it's like, he mentions that Honda was drafted in the war, and when he got back home, he started making movies. But then, we're gonna go back to the video and play a bit more, but see where we're going. And I think he brings it up later.
And Boat Rat Drives Boat were doing this as well. A Japan studio formed for this propaganda named Toho Studios that was showing all the cool tanks and guns. Look,
Okay. Okay, so it's not gonna come up to later, but my point is, he was implying here, and he actually states it later in the movie, that Ishiro Honda was making propaganda films. When he said it himself, he got drafted in the war. And if you want specifics, yeah, Honda worked at a camp he was stationed at a camp in China that did a lot of no things that I can't say on YouTube without, repercussions, but they did a lot of horrible things in that camp. Honda was a manager, per se, in that camp. And I have to be very, beat around the bush, but the point is, that camp was not a good thing. Honda actually was arrested, as he was a war criminal in that sense, where he got arrested with the rest of his, station, troop or whatnot. But that's the thing is, though, Honda is not, he's shown to he's been open about it. He's not been proud of it, but he's been very much open to say hey, what we did was not fucking cool. But yeah, it's what Honda, again, Honda is not proud of what he did. He wasn't proud of what he did. He was very much open because it's he was more of advocating hey, the war is horrible. War is no. And he didn't want, and from my understanding, he didn't try to seek forgiveness because of that. But the point is, when going directly talking about this video, Honda did not make any propaganda films because he was in the war. And as we showed on IMDb and as pointed out in his biography, he didn't get his first directing gig until 1949 with shorts and his feature-length movie in the 1950s with the Blue Pearl. So, you gotta love Misinformation.
and Japan attacked Hawaii. Not just Hawaii, but Pearl Harbor. Japan was hyped. They threw a little party even, thinking that they just did something crazy. Then Toho Studios made a fake propaganda film about the bombing that looked so real it even convinced the USA that it was real footage. America wasn't having it. Chester, call in the big guns. Ring ring, yeah, hello Robert J. Oppenheimer. You're
So, when he's referencing when they made footage that looked so real, it convinced America's that it thought it was the real film. That's specifically talking about Eiji Tsuburaya's work, his propaganda work with the film he did the special effects for about Pearl Harbor, and that actually got him briefly banned in the film industry, or at least publicly, because he did try to sneak into Toho Studios a few times, but yeah. Publicly, he was banned from filmmaking during the U.S. occupation, but once the U.S. occupation sort of lifted up, he was back to work publicly this time. But that's what Dr. Skipper was referencing.
Finished the bomb, took it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and turned that bitch into Fallout 3, with the only sole survivor being Wolverine. Japan took the L and surrendered. Truman kicked up his feet and ate sushi off his stomach like me after editing.
We're going to talk about this later, but...
And Japan was now under new management. In 1946, Honda came back to Japan to see that Hiroshima was decimated, and then went back to making movies. America had control over Japan.
Yeah, so, it's weird that, he keeps flip-flopping, it's yes, you're right. Honda came back in the war, but like he said, he didn't start making movies. He went back to working on movies, but he didn't direct a movie until 1949. He was still credited as assistant director until 1949.
America started trolling and did a nuclear test on their hydrogen bomb in the Pacific. The bomb was much bigger than the scientists expected, so the radiation caught up to a Japanese boat named the Lucky Dragon No. 5, which killed all the crew via radiation.
Okay, I missed on my first one, but no, it did not kill all the crew on the boat for radiation. One of the crew members died from radiation sickness. All of them got radiation sickness, but only one died from radiation sickness. I didn't pull out the source because I somehow missed it, but that is, and also sorry for the wrong buzz, but no, not all of them died because of radiation sickness. Only one did. Still, doesn't neglect the fact, but that is misinformation. Most of the crew did survive, but they all did get sick.
Yeah, Japan was pissed, and rightfully so. And this
Pissed would be one word to describe it. I would say more fear. They were like scared, you know. Like there was a lot of emotions. Like I think it was mostly fear. Like which, by the way, I can't talk about what happened in the 1950s. I was born in 1995, so I can't talk about that. But yeah, no. I feel like again he's going loosely on facts or like it feels like he's playing a game of telephone when it comes to some of these facts.
controversy pushed Toho producer Tomoyaki Tanaka to want to make a political film related to nuclear war. Like
Okay, so that's so how do you pronounce his name?
Toho producer Tomoyaki Tanaka.
Okay, so for me, you know, I misremembered his name earlier, so I'm not the one to clown him, but I want to talk about this point real quick.
To want to make a political film related to nuclear war. Like
So, not entirely correct. So, we're gonna have to go to Wikizilla, which not on that side, but yeah. So, if we actually go into development, why, you know, Tomoyuki Tanaka did that? So, this is according to Wikizilla. In February 1954, Toho began production of Shadow of Glory. But when, because of conflicts, you know, going on and tensions between Japan and Indonesia, you know, the Indonesia backed out of the studio, and Tomoyuki Tanaka, who was producing that film, and it was straight before, um, like they had to pretty much Tomoyuki Tanaka, he was a co-producer of that film, but right before they did, you know, filming, that's when they got the letter. They were all in like Indonesia, so they all had to fly back, and you know, so there was a lot of still tensions from World War II, you know, but pretty much like the story goes that Tomoyuki Tanaka on his flight back home from Indonesia, he looks over the water and he wonders like what could be underneath the water, and he was getting the idea based off 20,000 fathoms, you know, like giant monster from 20,000 leagues under the sea, you know, and he did take inspiration from the Lucky Dragon number 5 fishing boat, uh, but uh, to not like I guess the development. So what Doctor Skipper is saying, there's some truth, but it's like a half truth. Like some of it's true, but it's not telling the full story, and it's also not taking account to how Ishiro Honda and Takeo Murata influenced the nuclear allegories in that film. I think that's also important to acknowledge. So, anyways, back to the video.
King Kong, America was once again the blueprint, with The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, about a monster attacking New York after nuclear testing. Tanaka wanted to do the same thing, so Godzilla was made. There's a good video by Big Action Bill about the history of 1954 Godzilla.
Yeah, so guys, remember watch Big Action Bill because he does a lot of great work in his like videos. More work than Dr. Skipper did. I'm not pulling my punches here with some of the criticism.
For 1954, the film is serious and gritty. The human characters serve a purpose. Godzilla serves a purpose. It pushes so many standards in the special effects world as well. It's a masterpiece in world cinema and is not talked about enough due to it getting censored by the United States.
Okay, so briefly, again, you know, it's like the thing is, like, I want to quickly go into the whole Japan never criticized America directly. Um, I mean, they did mention America in the Japanese versions, but the whole point of the film wasn't to blame one country, as it was taking, you know, directly, it was directing criticism to the idea of nuclear weapons as a whole and to war itself being horrible. And, and there's sort of like this, sort of like, I guess, symbolic gesture that Japan's being punished, I guess, in a way, because Honda, like I mentioned, is not ignorant to the war crimes that Imperialist Japan made. So, and when Godzilla came out in Japan in 1954, from what I've heard, that the experience for a lot of Japanese audiences was cathartic, in a way. So there's that. But he's going to talk about the American version real quick. And I got some problems with his statement.
But 2014's human problem has a lot to do with how Godzilla is structured and how it being in the US hinders its storytelling. American Godzilla as a whole is an oxymoron thing to begin with. A thing made to represent America's atomic bomb in Japan is now being used for American heroism. So because of this, you can't really get that much depth with Godzilla, since he's the protagonist ally to the American military. The US doesn't have the same history of catastrophe as Japan did with the atomic bomb, and America is also obsessed with patriotism. So instead of making Godzilla an allegory for the consequences of mankind's actions, or have a much larger depth of Godzilla being a force of nature against the United States, he's now instead Superman, where he gets recontextualized to be Superman, which is hilarious when you rewatch 2014's Godzilla with this perspective after watching Japanese Godzilla films. Okay. First off, that hydrogen bomb test that destroyed the Lucky...
Oh, didn't mean to double click, but so I just want to state, I think he's going to bring it up again later on, but he's saying, how Godzilla's the American hero in this series, and it's like, no, they've actually, in the direct sequel, Godzilla King of the Monsters, there's a whole like meeting saying like, hey, what the heck should we do with Godzilla? And so there was that meeting, and there was the ending. It's like, hey, he's on our side for now, maybe, and then he brings it up that later on in the video that Godzilla never directly attacks U.S. or the U.S. Army. When Godzilla vs. Kong, he directly attacks an American Apex facility in Florida, and he's portrayed as the antagonist, like the monster antagonist of the film, and does directly attack the U.S. military escorting Kong. So it's like you can't really just say, it's like, oh, Godzilla's, this patriotic hero, when it's like, well, there's evidence to go against that. And there is that, and Monsterverse has that whole theme of man versus nature that you were talking about, Dr. Skipper. Because Godzilla is supposed to be this force of nature, or at least a territorial dinosaur-like creature, pretty much. But yeah, let's get back to the video, because I'm probably going to have to stop and talk about that later on.
Dragon 5, which got the 1954 movie made in the first place? Well, now the history has changed, and the hydrogen bomb was used to attack Godzilla on that test drop to protect the greater mankind, and it accidentally made him bigger. And after being threatened by this walking nuke and realizing there's nothing the US could do about it, it's now going to be the savior to America against the Japanese threat that was forced out of hiding.
So he is like purposely, or either he did not watch 2014, or he's purposely misrepresenting the facts. But I'll play a little bit more.
By humanity that then attacks Hawaii, where then the Japanese threat gets killed by a walking nuke that goes down in a heroic sacrifice, and then he decides he's got one more in him, so he gets up and everyone claps for him as fighter jets fly by, saving the day as he goes back into the water. Take in mind, like thousands of people have probably died to Godzilla, and by the looks of it, evacuation seems to be terrible. It's funny when...
So, okay. First of all, we got to get to the MUTOs. This is according to, Godzilla Fandom Wiki, Gojipedia. But in the movie, the MUTOs were discovered in the Philippines. So they're not Japanese creatures. They do not represent Japan. And they weren't waken up by humanity, as Dr. Skipper proudly complain, like said they were. The MUTOs woke up on their own volition. Monarch and humans, they were monitoring, the MUTOs, but the humans did not directly wake up the MUTOs. They woke up on their own. In fact, if we want to be technical, the MUTOs first attacked the power plant in Japan because, again, they came from the Philippines. So that's wrong, Just he's trying to make this narrative that Godzilla represents America and the MUTOs represent Japan when that's not what the movie was going for, and there's evidence to say that's just not what happened at all. So either, and there's evidence that shows that he's either not paying attention to the movies or he didn't really watch them. He's just going on of third-party sources, like when you mentioned earlier that dump water on the mainframe. It's a minor fact, but it wasn't water; it was alcohol that was spilled on the computer to make Mechagodzilla lose control. But anyway.
Quite beautiful, actually, how much Godzilla cares about the whole world. No, he just cares about the US because when he goes to China, even that shit gets absolutely decimated in his ego fight with the gorilla.
Again, we already talked about how in Godzilla vs. Kong, one of the first scenes was Godzilla attacking America directly. And also, when Godzilla was ignoring the military, it's more, I think more the intent, the intent was, and this is how I interpreted it, and I think a lot of people interpreted it like this, was that Godzilla didn't care about the U.S. They were flies, basically. So, like, he's going after pretty much the main threat. Pretty much, if you're a hunter and you're hunting, let's say a bear or something, this is probably a bad allegory, but are you going to really care about the, ants or bugs biting you? Not necessarily. You're kind of just going to shoo them away and go find the bear. But yeah.
Godzilla Superman is strange, and later in the Monsterverse they try to add depth to this. Like, look, he actually killed a bus full of children, and this company called Monarch is really shady with documentation and control, and
I mean, they were trying to add depth to the whole situation in the first movie, like how you mentioned, just Godzilla's presence, caused a tsunami that literally killed thousands upon thousands of people. And again, King of the Monsters, humanity didn't see Godzilla as an ally. They were like, hey, we should probably work on eliminating things like Godzilla. Like they wanted the Titans to be gone. That was the U.S. government. It's just like, I don't know, weird claims.
There's no discussion or nuance about anything in the world. The MUTOs that were...
Again, we showed in King of the Monsters, which, again, is not the most, beloved, like generally beloved movie in the Godzilla fan. Like Monsterverse, I mean, personally, King of the Monsters is my favorite, but like I mentioned earlier, there's a whole scene, government meeting scene talking about, like, hey, we should what should we do with these guys? Because, we should probably maybe kill them. And Monarch's like, no, that would be bad. That's my interpretation. But no, the point still stands. It's like, the U.S. never fully really accepts that Godzilla's a good or bad guy, but more of just like, hey, Godzilla's just we're just out of our leagues at this point. And also, again, the military was shown to be very incompetent in the 2014 version. And King of the Monsters.
Instantly vilified without any nuance either. These things were forced to wake up, and all they wanted to do...
They weren't forced to wake up. They woke up on their own fruition, like I said. And also, they caused a lot of... they're giant monsters, and they caused a lot of damage and killed a lot of people. So... I don't know.
Produce and have kids, but their children were blown up by Quicksilver. Then the parents were murdered by Godzilla, and everyone still claps in the end, even though everything's still in shambles and a shitload of people died. This is drastically different.
And again, King of the Monsters briefly addressed it, but if you were able to see Monarch, they actually go into a lot of the world building and show the effects of Godzilla. In fact, they still treated Godzilla as, a problem. It wasn't labeled MUTO Day, it was labeled G Day. Godzilla was still the main threat. Godzilla is still considered like, hey, this is the giant monster that we want to not deal with. So there's a lot of like, they go into the world building of that. So I highly recommend you check Monarch out if you want to see some really good world building for the Monsterverse.
2014 is flawed because it doesn't stand for anything, and is a safe depiction that makes this Americanized monster a hero without anything to say. And I know 1954 is old, and that movie is aged, but recently a movie has come out that has blown all the Godzilla movies in the past.
So we're going to get into some Shin Godzilla territory real quick, but look at all the Japanese movies that he did put the posters on, but he never brings up because apparently it's only now that Japan has started the cycle, even though Shin Godzilla came out in 2016. Okay, maybe he has a point with the anime trilogy. I'm joking,
10
but
years out the water, and it was from Toho Studios, or Godzilla is back in Japan, and that movie was
again, ignoring Shin Godzilla, which came out in 2016.
Takashi Yamazaki's Godzilla Minus One. Godzilla Minus One was why I made this entire video, because it might be the best Godzilla movie ever made, and it actually made me feel something. I'm a big box office pessimist, and lately American blockbusters have been safe, generic, and boring, which is no surprise that they've been flopping left and right because people are burnt out of high-budget mediocrity. So to watch a Godzilla movie with compelling human characters, nuanced discussion with critiques on the Japanese government, while having havoc and consequences that feel impactful, while also having an antagonist that is menacing, threatening, and terrifying, all done with 50.
Okay, so okay, we're going to talk about the 50 million real quick, but notice how at least half the descriptions was for Shin Godzilla as well, and he used Shin Godzilla footage, but no, he's talking about minus one. This video feels like a parody sometimes, but see, this is what I'm getting at. Like, either, it's like either he didn't do the research and he only really watched the original and Godzilla minus one and of course like the Monsterverse movies, or that like he knows about these other movies. He's obviously had to watch these clips to edit, to put them into the movies. Like put clips from Heisei, Millennium, and Shin Godzilla into the movie, into his video, I should say. Yet he's presenting these facts as minus one is the first time in a long time that Japan made a Godzilla movie, when Japan's been making Godzilla media, like has returned to making Godzilla media since 2016. And I also want to say that 2014 was inspiration for minus one, as I think the director Takeshi Yamazaki mentioned. He took inspiration from Godzilla 2014. But what I'm getting at is that, see what I mean when I say that it doesn't feel like he's just not researching it, and it's more like, okay, you had, with the editing, you had to like at least look at the trailers, at least you did something. Like, you didn't just pull clips from minus one or the original. You pulled clips from a lot of different Godzilla movies. It's better. And when you were doing like describing minus Godzilla, which is accurate, some like those descriptions are, I agree with minus one, but some of those descriptions, like nuanced critiques on the government, and making Godzilla a horrific antagonist, that's something that could be described for Shin Godzilla, and you put Shin Godzilla in the place. So clearly you've had to at least acknowledge Shin Godzilla, but you act like Godzilla minus one is the first thing that Toho came out. So that's where I'm like, I can't just say that, hey, this was a poorly researched video. I'm more of like, hey, this video is misinterpreting facts to spin a narrative. That's, this is where, like, and again, he acknowledges Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. We've seen in this video alone, like, contradictions to his point, in his own video. It's just so weird. Like, he is trying to spin this narrative, but some of the facts are not aligning it. So from what is, what it seems like, is that he's misinterpreting facts purposely to spin this narrative. Now, again, I'm not making that definitive, like, that is a strong allegation, but, we can still give him the benefit of the doubt that he just didn't do the research, as a best case scenario. But you can tell why, you can see why that, hey, this was, this feels off in many ways. So, and we're almost done. Oh my God, I've been recording for over an hour. Jesus.
$15 million was beyond.
So, actually, did it say right there? So, man,
Terrifying.
I don't know why
All
it
done
didn't.
with 15
Under 15 million, like how he highlighted there, but that might.
million dollars was beyond satisfying. If it wasn't obvious from the games industry, with companies like From Software and Nintendo, Japan could cook up some pretty cool shit. Godzilla -1 makes American Godzilla look like an embarrassment because it does everything better. Like 1954, Godzilla isn't a character, but more of a natural disaster. And for a natural disaster to have
One more time, we're gonna run to. By the way, something about the budget is that there's a lot of nuances with the. Like, some of the reason why the budgets are smaller is because, workers in Japan aren't exactly treated, are paid appropriately. I mean, the anime industry is notorious for underpaying its animators. But anyway, we're getting this one point right here.
1954, Godzilla isn't a character, but more of a natural disaster. And for a
That's arguable, but I'm not gonna stress on it. That's his
natural
opinion.
disaster to have, like I said earlier, with media like Oppenheimer and nuclear war being a really big issue today, the atomic bomb debate is now fresh again. But with everything aside, without the atomic bomb drop, Japan would have continued a relentless war with the United States. So while I know God.
Okay, so we got a problem with the atomic bombs use. So he's on the side that, hey, the atomic bombs were necessary or Japan wouldn't continue. But no. There's actually a lot of evidence to say that, hey, Japan would have surrendered either, with or without the atomic bombs. Because here's the thing. Japan was already starving at this point, and even in the movie -1, it shows that, some people are starting to lose faith in their country, and that they want the war to be over. Like, I've also read, like, Osamu Tezuka's biography, like his comic biography, and it shows how he grew up during the war, and there's a consensus that, a lot of people were not happy with the war at all. They wanted it over as much as anybody else. There was a lot of unrest, In fact, like, Ishiro Honda, like, even before he was drafted, he was against the war. His, like, group, like, circle of friends, like, that include Kira, sorry, Kurosawa. I'm sorry, I don't know why I blanked on his name, but Akira Kurosawa, they were all against, the war, so it's not like Japan was all, like, everybody was all for the war and Japan being victorious. It's not like everybody was there, supporting Japan. There was some like division, but it wasn't really public or not, noteworthy. But the thing is, though, Japan was already at a point where they were hungry, they were losing manpower, and top it all off, Russia was going to be on their butts real soon, and they were already struggling to fight off against America, and they were starting to lose in China. So they were already at the point like, we might surrender. But what the difference is, though, is that the U.S. did cause a lot of, bombings, like a lot of casualties, like civilian casualties, even before the atomic bombing. So when we say it's like, oh, the atomic bomb, and there's the thing, it's like the atomic bombings actually kill, like, numerically like, just statistically speaking, the atomic bombs killed less people than, like, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima killed less people than the Tokyo fire raid bombings, that the U.S. caused. So that could have been what happened, but that doesn't negate the significance of the atomic bomb, because the thing was the fire raid bombings. Well, those were multiple bombs being dropped on civilian houses and whatnot, but the atomic bombs was just one bomb. So there's that significance right there. But there's another factor too, and I'm pulling this from the Times article right here. And this atomic bomb history expert on the terrible moral dilemma in Oppenheimer. So that brought up. And this is it's like, how well did Oppenheimer capture the U.S. decision to drop the bomb? And here's what they said. The expert said, here's the funny thing about the decision to drop the bomb. There was no decision. What do I mean by that? It's not like a bunch of men sat in a room and said, are we going to drop the bomb or not? That's not the way it worked. There was a huge amount of momentum to drop the bomb no matter what. Okay, so we're going to have to drop the narrative that the bombs are necessary, and without the bombs, Japan would just conquer the world. No, that's not what was going to happen, and the U.S. was going to drop those bombs no matter what. That was pretty much what happened. But yeah, anyway, it's weird. It's like Dr. Skipper, he has a very, anti-America message until he gets to talking about World War II, when all of a sudden, oh, nope, I'm pro-America right here. America was in the right, Japan was wrong. Which, yeah, Japan was definitely in the wrong. Imperialist Japan, screw them. They were fucking fascists. I'm going to have to censor this video, my fucking god. But, yeah, no, they were fascists. Imperial Japan, they sucked. They did horrible, horrible war crimes. But that does not exonerate the U.S. from committing horror crimes and killing civilians. And while there was a military base in Hiroshima, where the bomb dropped was in a civilian location. Hiroshima was still a civilian city, occupied by a lot of civilians, and a lot of the horror, the thing about the nuclear bombs, like the atomic bombs, is that it had a very lasting long-term effect on the victims. That's where a lot of the deaths, even if you survived the initial bombing, you could, a lot of people died from the radiation sickness that came afterwards. There was a long-term effect caused by atomic bombings, and some of the horrific atrocities that came from the atomic bombs, it's hard to digest. I've read stories of from firsthand, survivors of the atomic bombings, and it's just some of the stuff they describe is just so horrific. Something that you would only think would be possible in a science fiction book, like science fiction horror. But no, this was real life stuff. But yeah, I really wanted to tackle this narrative that all the atomic bombs were necessary and Japan deserved it, and which is no, we're dropping that right now.
Godzilla 1954 is very much still an anti-war film about how nukes are bad, showing what Japan went through. It does brush past that Japan's military threw a stone at the United States, killing United States civilians when they were well aware they were never going to win a conflict with the United States, but still did it anyway since they needed to get resources from claimed U.S. lands that were under embargo laws. So Pearl Harbor was an attack on the U.S. Navy to demoralize the U.S., but they didn't attack the repair yards, so it was pointless anyway, and got their whole nation nuked in retaliation. So while the ethics of the atomic bomb can be debated, Japan's military put their civilians in harm's way for no reason, which is...
So, okay, there's definitely nuances. He's trying to be, well, yeah, Japan should not have attacked Pearl Harbor, but something noteworthy pointing out is that Pearl Harbor was a U.S. military station. That's why they were targeted. Whereas Hiroshima wasn't. It had a military base, but it was mostly a civilian population, and the U.S. caused a lot more civilian casualties than Japan ever did to the U.S. I'm not denying that Japan killed civilians. I mean, just look at their occupation in China. That was horrible. Yeah, screw Imperialist Japan. But, that's again not exonerating the casualties that the U.S. committed. So I'm Well, here's my stance on it. Screw both the US and Imperialist Japan.
Why modern-day Japan is more resentful of Imperial Japan when it comes to anti-war rather than the United States. Japan during the 1910s to 1920s was in a really good innovative period called the Taisho Jidai. Japan was transitioning to more of a Western democratic government with a lot of Western influence impacting culture, arts, politics, and many other avenues. I need to clearly state that Japan and Japan's military are two different things. Japan's military was a parasite to the Japanese government taking control from the inside, which as we know was the demise of Japan itself. I joked about it earlier, but people like Ishiro Honda, who made the original Godzilla, was even at fault for this. While he acknowledged how horrific war was, he still made propaganda films for the Japanese military.
Like we stated before, Ishiro Honda did not make propaganda films for the army because he was in the army. He was drafted in this video that you mentioned already. How could he make propaganda films if he was stationed in the war? He was drafted. He was in there. You know, he was fighting and he had to do horrible things. He had to see horrible things. You know, and it's just like, that's not exonerating from what Ishiro Honda has done, but it's saying, but this is misinformation. Honda did not make propaganda films. Eiji Tsuburaya, he did make he did make propaganda films, or specifically, at the very least, he did a lot of the special effects on propaganda films, which was forced by a lot of governments, by the imperialist government, for films to studios to make, and the U.S. did the same thing. They were like, hey, you got to make some propaganda pieces. But I just got to tackle this, and I want to talk about this point real quick.
I joked about it earlier, but people like Ishiro Honda, who made the original Godzilla, was even at fault for this. While he acknowledged how horrific war was, he still made propaganda films for the Japanese military, which led to this cancer spreading. Propaganda and military control started dragging Japanese society into their conflicts. Men were expected to go to war and die. It was seen as honorable to serve and die for your military. This is why I prefer...
Yeah, and so again, I feel like he's trying to string up this narrative, and he's showing footage from other Ishiro Honda Godzilla works, specifically King Kong vs. Godzilla and Mothra vs. Godzilla, to portray this narrative that Ishiro Honda was making propaganda films that showed, Japan, showed support for imperialist Japan, when that's not the case. In fact, if you want a good reference to Ishiro Honda's stance. Oh,
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
I just realized I wasn't even playing the video. Oh my god. But it's fine. As long as you can hear it, as what he said, it's fine with me. But I should have clicked on. But anyways, what I'm getting at is, if you want a good Ishiro Honda movie that shows how he thought about imperialist Japan and the war, he did a great movie called Atragon, which, that goes over the imperialist Japan. So again, it's not exonerating Honda for his involvement in the war, even though he was drafted, against his will. It shows that he did resent everything, and he did do his best post-war to say that what imperialist Japan did wrong, war's bad. And again, Atragon really covers that. It really talks about that narrative of just how wrong imperialist Japan was. Anyway, let's get back to...
Godzilla Minus One is an unbiased masterclass when it comes to being an anti-war film. So much so that you could remove Godzilla from it, and it would still be an amazing standalone film. Which brings us back to why America can't do Godzilla. Back in 1954, when Godzilla came to the US, it was censored and remarketed to look like a fun blockbuster, similar to something like The Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, cutting 20 minutes of crucial political discussion, where then after the main lead was an inserted American reporter, where then the critiques of America's nuclear testing and nuclear power were also censored and changed. 1956, Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about this real quick, but first he's gonna say something really stupid.
Monsters is a spineless shit movie that gutted the original impact of the 1954 version and represents how the United States often views critical media. So when we look at the depth of something like Minus One and then go back to 2014, you see more cracks.
Okay, so he didn't say the stupid thing I was thinking about, but in regards to Godzilla vs. King, Godzilla King of the Monsters 1956, I am tired of this narrative, and I don't I don't think he watched King of the Monsters. I think, if I'm being honest, just based on this video, he's just regurgitating what others have said. And again, he's kind of sort of admitted that he does his research primarily from other video essayists. And video essayists like me, we sometimes inject our own opinion. And he may be taking those opinions from others and representing those facts. And I and here's the thing, it's like maybe he did watch King of the Monsters, but it's something that I've heard. It's like, oh, King of the Monsters censored, the movie, like the original, censored the movie and inserted an American hero and blah 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 blah. It was awful. It was, but it's like, here's the thing, like Godzilla King of the Monsters 1956 is very important. Like, it is extremely important because we're gonna go into. I think I have it on a wiki. Yeah, so this is Wikipedia, so it's not the best representation. But the thing is, Godzilla King of the Monsters opened, April 4th, 1956, and it was theatrically released in the United States, to 283 theaters, blah, 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 blah. And the film earned more than $2 million in rentals. Okay, so, I'm trying to get, there we go. It was the first Japanese film feature to become a commercial success in the United States and was at the time the fourth foreign film to have grossed more than $1 million at the American box office. See, that's the thing. Without Godzilla King of the Monsters, we would not be where we are with like foreign media, especially Japan, like anime and whatnot. We wouldn't be as accepting or welcoming to it as we are today if it wasn't for this movie. What this movie did was able to bring because it's not like foreign films weren't coming to the US at that time, but they were more art house. They were always subtitled, and they were for really just the cinema fans, but not necessarily the general audience. So this was like first general audience appeal. But I also want to refute the claims that, they censored the movie and whatnot. It's like, well, what they did is that they cut out, moments of the movie for pacing reasons. And the subtext of the movie is still kept intact. And something I think is appreciated, like, I don't think gets much appreciation for this movie, is that they could have had an American make Raymond Burr's character a soldier, but no. And they could have made Raymond Burr the hero. No, they made him the protagonist. They still give urgency to Japan. Raymond Burr is just the reporter. He's just our lens to what's happening, in the movie. He's sort of the American surrogate, just he's only a witness to what's happening. He doesn't really play a crucial, he only he's only there in the important moments, but it still gives urgency to the Japanese people. It still gives them the authority of what's going to happen to Godzilla and whatnot. Steve Martin, Raymond Burr's character, is only reporting what's happening. Sure, he does, tell Emiko that, hey, she should go talk to Dr. Serizawa to use the Oxygen Destroyer. But he's not the only one telling Emiko to do that. And also, I think something that the movie doesn't give credit for is that it still allows the Japanese cast to speak in Japanese. Not every line is dubbed over, and in the Japanese version. Just only the most the important lines, or when characters are talking to Steve Martin, that's when they're dubbed over. But again, it's like it doesn't remove the impact or the subtext of the original movie. It still keeps that messaging. It still keeps the movie's core message that nuclear weapons are bad. War is bad. But it just made it so that we had an American. It just made it so, hey, general audiences can digest that fact. American general audiences, I should say. But yeah, I'm really tired of that narrative.
Media. So when we look at the depth of something like -1 and then go back to 2014, you see more cracks of how 2014 has nothing to say. My friend Sweets Online gave me a quote when we were talking about this video. If you want to know what the biggest piggy bank is in the world, look at the United States military. Funding games like Call of Duty, movies like Top Gun, and many other pieces of media to display the United States military. You could get a lot of your budget paid when you display the military as heroic badasses. But now you have restrictions of being a puppet, not able to bite the hand that feeds you. United States propaganda is so prevalent that you might not even know it's propaganda. To film with American military technology and vehicles is expensive. Thus, why the Department of Defense will give you money, tax breaks, and access to display the military in your film in hopes that people might want to enlist. But the catch is that the DoD has to approve your script and messaging of how the military is depicted. Thus, we bring up Vietnam. The Vietnam War.
So I do want to state, he's bringing up this, and what he's saying to my acknowledge, to my understanding is true, is that like, hey, um, American military does have a lot of influence in the entertainment industry. That I think is true, but I think it is important to realize that, with a lot of the Godzilla movies and some other tokusatsu movies, the Japanese military had a lot of, it's sort of like similar, the Japanese self-defense force had. There's a bit of similarities with, the Godzilla series, and that's where it's like, hey, they had to cooperate with the Japanese self-defense force for some of the movies. In fact, if you look in the history of the versus movies, the Japanese self-defense force stopped wanting to be like betrayed in the Godzilla movies after Godzilla vs. Mothra in 1992, and so which resulted in the creation of G-Force. So there you go. I hope I should remember this time to.
When you do more research yourself, you see how much America cares about their image due to the films being seen nationwide.
How ironic.
So they make sure that America looks cool and noble no matter what, even if the truth might not be so. So when you see Godzilla 2014 with a budget of $160 million, with American Navy and bomb squads and Air Force all helping Godzilla save the day, it's no surprise that the film had an agreement with the Department of Defense where they provided locations, vehicles, and military representation. And while at times the military is incompetent and kind of useless in the film, it's never acknowledged or critiqued with grand messaging, because like I said, to bite the hand that feeds you is going to drop your budget from 160 million to low 15 million like Godzilla -1. It's why Godzilla.
So that's not how it works. Like that's not. It doesn't drop down to that drastically. And again, we also reported that it was actually under 15 million -1 budget was.
It can't work in America. To be critical of the United States government requires you to be independent. And by how bloated the film industry is with high film budgets and how propaganda has affected how the Godzilla character is viewed, you make more money by having Godzilla be Superman, killing tons of innocent people where then they clap at him saving the day, rather than him destroying the United States with the government losing and being useless. And this has been a problem since 1956, when America turned a tragedy film to a blockbuster, gutting it of any meaning, and no surprise Godzilla King of the Monsters made way more money than Gojira. So much so that Japan stopped calling him Gojira and took on Godzilla and
Nope. So, okay. We gotta stop right there. That is, again, another misinterpretation or misinformation. America did not turn, Gojira into Godzilla. That was something that was done in the creation of Godzilla when they were getting the rights to, like, Gojira or Godzilla, because the thing is, Godzilla is the translation of Gojira. They use this process to pretty much make Japanese words into English words. I forget the name of the process, but they took, basically, it's like Gojira, Gojira, and try to do the closest, like, English representation, which is Godzilla. So it wasn't like, oh, they turned it into Gojira into Godzilla and Japan started calling him Godzilla. It's like, no, that's not how that worked at all. In fact, he's still called Gojira in Japan, but they also do acknowledge that his English, his name in English is Godzilla, and it's not the only monster to do this. Like Mothra in Japan is Mothra, but in America it's Mothra, and that's again doing the same thing of breaking the katakana, the Japanese pronunciation, and working to make that into an English word. So there's that fact. And also, again, the thing is, when 1956 happened, there was already two Godzilla movies. So, alright, but he's going to say something else stupid real quick.
Painted his image.
Oh, I gotta.
Gojira. So much so that Japan stopped calling him Gojira and took on Godzilla and repainted his image as the savior of Japan that fought giant monsters. 529.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, that's not. America did not have any say as to what Godzilla's image is supposed to be. That was, again, a decision made to compete with the likes of Gamera and Ultraman that were popping up in 1965 and 1966, respectively. I've already mentioned that. It is true that America had some co-productions with, Godzilla movies, but they didn't interfere with how Godzilla was portrayed. They really, at best, it was like, hey, have this American actor be in your movie, or add this scene, for the American film and whatnot, and stuff like that.
1,387,000,000. They're making money, and that's all that matters.
So, okay,
Monsters.
we gotta talk about the budget.
529,387,000.
So, the thing is about Godzilla King of the Monster, King of the Monster had a really high budget and also had a lot of money thrown into marketing, so much so that 387 million was not great. Like it wasn't a box office bomb by any means, but it was basically the movie made even. It didn't make a success, and part of it was, again, they had marketing for over a year and they were competing in a very, very, like tough market at the time because Avengers Endgame High was still going on. Aladdin, the remake, came out. Even though now we don't like Disney remakes, still in 2019, Disney remakes weren't as highly disregarded as they are now. But yeah, this is not. Well, yeah, that's a lot of money still. It's like, it's not representing the full facts.
Million. They're making money, and that's all that matters now. But what is art, and how do we view art? Is a nothing blockbuster funded by the US military better than a $15 million Japanese film with a lot to say because it made more money? Is King of the Monsters better than Gojira since it made more money? We're beginning to look at box office as...
And again, here's the thing, like, you gotta remember, like, Gojira was a big success in Japan. Like, the original 1954 Godzilla movie. That was a big success in Japan, and something to really consider is that the yen and the Japanese and the US dollar are two different currencies, and how Japan back then, especially, how they counted a success was not like they didn't like look at the profits per se, like or how much the movie grossed and whatnot. That wasn't like the main figure. They were looking at ticket sales, specifically how many people were going, how many tickets did we sell for this movie? That was the main point. But yeah, it's important to mention that two different, economies going on. And also in 1950s, U.S. was really doing well economically wise, and people had a lot more money to spend. Versus in like 1950s Japan, where they're still recovering from the war. They're still recovering economically wise. The economic boom didn't happen until the 1960s in Japan, so there was still a lot of recovery. So there's a lot of nuances to that differences that he's not, like, you can't really compare Godzilla 1956 Godzilla King of the Monsters success in America to Gojira's success in Japan in 1954. It's just they're not comparable because they're two different economies, and happening, that were pretty much happening. Anyway, we're almost done with this movie. I've already recorded for almost 2 hours. I'm so done.
But if there's anything I can hope to get across with this video, it's to research the things you watch and to give
Research the things you watch. Okay, you know what? I think that is a good place to end because I pretty much talked about this. But yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Skipper. Research the things you watch because you didn't do that here. Yeah, as I've recorded almost like pretty much over 2 hours just going through your video, pointing every inconsistency, every information that you put out. Is so ironic that you say research the things you like because again, you just have so much blatant misinformation, so much misinterpreting the facts, and you show no receipts for, you show no sources for, and you didn't do research at best. I no, and that's like being generous. You didn't do research and you made a terrible video. But at worst, you did do the research, but you misinterpreted, you basically manipulated the facts to support your narrative. And this is the reason why I made this video. There was so much misinformation in this video. Some of it's semantics, but there was a lot that's just like, no, what you're saying is wrong, and you're painting the franchise, you're painting a lot of stuff, unfactually true, and it needs to be called out. And that's why, and it's just like something I can't really do on Twitter because it's just, I'm sitting here for 2 hours doing, just going over misinformation. I am so fucking dumb. But anyway, yeah, I'm sure I've also probably gotten some stuff wrong because I'm not knowledgeable on everything. But let me know in the comments. I tried the best I can to call out some misinformation, and I might have not catched it all, or I might have gotten some facts wrong. And if I did get some facts wrong, please tell me in the comments below. But yeah, this was just a really bad video. And again, if it wasn't so riddled with misinformation and wasn't getting tens of thousands of views, I would not even be talking about it. But yeah, I don't know what next unscripted video is going to be like, but yeah, I didn't expect to be recording for 2 hours. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and remember, research the things you watch. And yeah, have a good day. Take care and shwatch.